Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. I'm Anthony Giuliano, and my guest this week is Erik Deckers. Erik, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's been a long time since you and I have seen each other, real world or otherwise. When was the last time we were in the same place? Do you know?
I think you came down to Indianapolis when I still lived there, but I remember you and I drove to, was it West Virginia for the BAM conference?
Yes.
And I don't know if that was the last time we were together or if there was a time after that, but that was the longest time we were together because it was like 6-7 hours in the car.
Yeah, it was a long drive. And that was in the somewhat early days of social media. Things have changed a little bit since then. And that's one of the ways when I think of Erik Deckers, you are positioned in my head as one of the first people who seem to understand social media and share that understanding with the world. So you will forever be positioned in my head in that way. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's at least what I think.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was definitely one of the first.
Yeah. Well, and you've sort of codified that knowledge in a couple books and then with your business. And I want to talk about how all of that evolved, because like me, your career started pre-internet, or at least pre-social media as we know it today. So talk to me a little bit about career path. What were you thinking about when you were sorting out what you wanted to do with your life? I know you ended up at Ball State. I think you were a philosophy major.
Yes.
Do I have that right? Okay, so talk to me about what the plan was and what you did about that, and then when did things change?
Okay. I'll hit the high points. We can jump back to something if you want. So I went to Ball State and became a philosophy major because it seemed interesting. And so I thought, well, I want to stay in higher education. But then I discovered that not only were there more professors than there were positions, but you had to know German or French fluently to be able to read Kant or Sartre in the original language. And I had 3 years of high school German, and so I was not about that anymore.
Sure.
So I decided to go into student personnel administration. Got my master's at Ball State in that. worked in residence life for a couple of years at Illinois State University. Went back to Ball State for a master's in speech communication, and ended up getting married to one of my classmates.
Yep.
And we went to work for her dad.
Okay.
And he had just started a company that was exporting poultry feeding equipment. We were based up in Syracuse, Indiana, so just down the road from you.
Yep.
So we were in Syracuse, and our suppliers were from all over the country, and we sent it all over the world. And I did that for a number of years, and then hit a couple of different jobs. Worked for a software company in Fort Wayne. Then we moved to Indianapolis, and I worked in crisis communication for the Indiana Department of Health. And then I went to work for a direct mail company. Again, each of these jobs are like 2 years.
Yeah.
And worked for a direct mail company in Indianapolis. And that's where I discovered social media.
Yeah.
And started playing with that and started trying to make that a part of my job. And found that people were more interested in the social media than they were what I was supposed to be selling.
Sure.
Nobody wanted to talk about direct mail. They wanted to have meetings, but they're like, tell me about blogging. How do I do blogging? It's like, that's not what I'm selling.
Yeah.
And so, not surprisingly, I got laid off from that job.
Yep.
And a couple months later, got hired by Pro Blog Service. Actually, at the time, it was Professional Blog Service.
Okay.
And got hired by the guy because he and I, we grew up in the same city. We both grew up in Muncie, went to Ball State at the same time, didn't know each other.
Oh, wow.
And I had been active on this local social network called Smaller Indiana, which I think you were a part of.
Yeah. I had forgotten all about that, but yes, it was. Yeah.
I'm still trying to buy the domain name, but I keep hoping like every year the guy who's camped on it is going to just let it expire and I can pick it up just for nostalgia's sake. But Mike had a job opening for a blog manager. And so I emailed him about it and said I was interested in applying. And he calls me like 10 minutes later. And this was the shortest job process I've ever been in. He calls me 10 minutes later and we're talking. And I said, well, do you want me to send you any samples? And he said, no. I said, well, do you want to just set up a time to meet? He said, no, just come work for me. He said, I've seen what you can do on Smaller Indiana. He said, I talk about blogging to anybody. They all mention your name. So just come work for me. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So 2 days later, I'm at the office learning how to do what he's doing.
Yeah.
3 months after that, he said to me and the other guy who worked there, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go into consulting.
Okay.
And so he sold the company to me and my new business partner. And then in 2013, I bought Paul out.
Okay.
And became the sole owner and changed the company name to ProBlog Service because it was easier. Yeah. And Paul and I still stay in touch and still chat once in a while. But now my office is pretty much wherever I can get Wi-Fi.
Okay. All right. So there was always a communication bent to the work you did. And one of the things that I read a lot of what you write, and one of the many things that resonates with me is, yeah.
I'm glad somebody does.
But very genuinely, one of the things that resonates with me is you always come back to, this is really no different in terms of what works than what's always worked with storytelling. Mm-hmm. That there's no real tricks to having a successful blog, or for that matter, having a successful social media presence. It's do you have a good story and do you tell the story well? And it seems like it's consistent with what I've found, is that if someone is a good communicator and they're rooted in good communication practices, they can do social media really well, even if they don't have a lot of knowledge of technology. Has that been your experience? Does that reflect your work?
Completely. And I used to piss off a lot of the younger social media people, especially in the early days, because they're all saying, well, you can't be an expert because Malcolm Gladwell says you have to have 10,000 hours to be an expert. Malcolm Gladwell never said that. Malcolm Gladwell said you have to have 10,000 hours of perfect practice to be a phenom like Peyton Manning or Tiger Woods. So that whole argument never made sense to me.
Sure.
But even so, it wasn't that you had to know how to use the tools, because anybody can learn how to use the tools in an hour.
Sure. Yeah.
Is, do you know how to communicate with the tools?
Yeah.
And people ask me about what is the future of content marketing, and I tell them it's nothing. It's not going to look any different than it does right now.
Yeah.
It's pictures and words and sounds.
Yep.
And so what do we read? What do we watch? What do we hear? We've been doing that for thousands of years. And so the tools have always changed, and the tools will continue to change, but pictures and words and sounds will remain the same.
Yep.
And so, I used to tell people when I'd give talks or I'd write articles, I'd say, don't hand the social media reins to the intern just because they're young and they know, technology. It needs to be your seasoned professionals because they know communication.
Yes. And they have generally better judgment, at least if my life experience is any track record.
Yes.
That you can trust, someone who's a little more experienced with the keys to the brand might not be as easy to trust someone who's just getting their feet under them professionally.
Well, I remember a couple of stories where people would just make this horrible mistake.
Yeah.
Like there was some kid who was just starting out in social media management, working for some advertising agency that managed, I think it was like Chevy or GMC. And he lived in Detroit.
Yep.
And tweeted, I can't believe the drivers in Detroit, we're the car capital of the world, and yet people can't fucking drive.
Yeah.
But he accidentally tweeted it from the Chevy account, not his own.
Yeah.
And I think the agency got fired.
Yeah.
Kid got fired, and he's not working in that field anymore. I mean, he's probably selling insurance or something.
There's a lot of cautionary tales out there for sure.
Yeah, and older people can make those same dumb mistakes, but that taught us all to be very, very careful and to pay attention to what we're doing. But I think that's that kind of wisdom that comes with age.
Sure, for sure. Well, Erik, you've got a diverse career and a diverse professional life, and tell me if this is untrue, but you really do a few different things. You are the principal at ProBlog Service. You're a humor columnist, and you write long form stuff, including books. You still doing all of those things? Are all those still part of your professional life?
Sure.
So let's take those. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say I'm doing a lot of ghost blogging and starting to get into ghost writing of books now. That's become a bigger part of my portfolio.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to touch on each of those, and I'll start with the humor column stuff. Tell me a little bit about how that became part of your professional portfolio and what you like about it, what's challenging about it, all those things.
Well, I've been doing it for about 26 years, and I got hired at the Wakarusa Tribune in north central Indiana, Wakarusa Tribune and the Mishawaka Enterprise, because it's owned by the same family.
Yep.
And I met the publisher at the Kosciuszko County Democratic Party.
Okay. So it was just you and he in the room then.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And not a lot of Democrats in Kosciuszko County.
Yeah.
It's like one of the most Republican districts in the entire country.
Yeah.
And so there's like 12 of us there, and he was our guest speaker. And when I found out what he did, I asked him if he would be interested in publishing a humor column. And he said, well, send me a couple samples and drop by the office. And so I did that because I'd written a few just on spec, just in case I could do it somewhere. I faxed him the samples.
Yeah.
This is how long ago that was. I faxed him the samples and showed up a few days later, or I guess a couple weeks later, and I asked him the same question. And he asked me that all-important question, are you a Democrat? I said, well, yeah, that's where we met. And he said, welcome aboard. And so I started writing columns for him, and they were awful. Oh, my God, they were terrible. I can't even go, like the first 5 years, I will not go back and read what I wrote for the first 5 years. And I hope nobody unearths it because they were just god-awful. But he gave me that chance, and he let me develop, and I learned how to harness not only my voice, but kind of taking elements from other writers that I really liked and pulling those in. And all writers do that. We take 3 or 4 writer voices that we like and make it our own. Well, those writers did the same thing. So we're like, grandparent and great-grandparent voices of all these writers who came before us.
Sure.
But he let me find my voice, and I started doing other writing projects, other humor writing projects, and I really got to kind of cement and strengthen that humor muscle. And now that's a lot of what I do. Like I'm writing scripts for a proposed television show, and my novel is a humor novel, and that's the thing that I would like to be writing the most of, but that's also the thing that pays the least.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. Are there any particular humorists who you draw inspiration from? I was always a big James Thurber guy. People think of him as Secret Life of Walter Mitty, but I loved his humor columns and just kind of the cadence of it. Anyone who you admire, who you try to emulate at least somewhat?
I tried emulating Douglas Adams and P.G. Wodehouse.
Yeah.
But I also have a rule about no adverbs. And they don't have that filter at all, and so I realized I couldn't juggle both. So I like their kind of surprise of humor and some of the silliness of it. So I try to borrow from that. Christopher Moore is a humor novelist. He's a great one. He wrote Bloodsucking Fiends and Fool and Lamb, which was a story about Jesus and his best friend Biff. And I especially like Dave Barry.
Yeah, Dave Barry's great. Yeah,
I borrowed a lot of Dave Barry's style very early on.
Yeah.
So he's synthesized right in there.
Yeah, and I can see some of that for sure in some of your writing. So let's talk about the author piece, because you've got Mackinac Island Nation, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Mackinac, sorry. And that
French.
I always manage to get those two confused. And that's the novel, correct?
Yes.
And then you've got some more professional, if you will, stuff that you've done in partnership with other writers. Talk a little bit about the books and what that experience has been like.
Okay. So Kyle Lacey and I in 2010 wrote Branding Yourself, which I managed to squeeze a bunch of humor into.
Yeah.
But we wrote that because we had, the year before, I had helped Kyle write Twitter Marketing for Dummies.
Mm-hmm.
And we enjoyed the process so much, we said, well, let's write another book.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what do you want to write? And he said, well, in the 3 years since you have been out networking, doing social media, because I had just left the state 3 years previously, state government 3 years previously, I had to get to know a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I made a big presence on social media. And he said, we need to write a playbook for the Erik that was you back in 2007 to get him to the point where you are today in 2010. And so we did that. We wrote that playbook. We got it published by one of Pearson's imprints, Q, which has the office in Indianapolis. So we lucked out there.
Yeah.
Got that published. And I thought, well, that's 2 books in 2 years, so I'm going to take a break. And then 2 weeks later, I had an idea for a book, and I texted Jason Falls, who's from Louisville, and I said, hey, I've got this idea for this book. What if we just did a book making a business case for social media for executives? And he said, that sounds like a great idea. I get to pick the title.
Yeah.
I said, what is it? And he said, No Bullshit Social Media. I said, that's wonderful. Let's go with that. And so we pitched that to Q, and they loved it, and we published that, and wrote it in like 5 months.
Yeah.
Kyle and I did 5 months for Branding Yourself. And so I had a third book in 3 years, and
wow.
Then we did a second edition of Branding Yourself, and then I helped another guy do the Owned Media Doctrine, which is all about corporate content marketing and how to build a news team with that. So I think I did 5 books in 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So where did the novel come in? Was that a more of a passion project, something you did, you've always wanted to do? And how did that fit into everything else you were doing?
So my wife and I had visited Mackinac Island a few times back in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And the idea for the book popped into my head back then. It's been rattling around ever since. And I asked myself, what if the island were forced to secede from the United States? What would that look like? And so in 2015, I started writing that.
Yeah.
And just started planning it out. And I have this habit. You're not supposed to do this. If any new writers, you're not supposed to edit as you write. And you're especially not supposed to edit the manuscript as you go. But each day I would start writing, and I would start by reading and polishing up the first, what I had written the day before, and then going at it until pretty soon I'm like reading 3 chapters and writing for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But after a few months, that first chapter was so polished. It was just smooth like silk. And I heard about this writer's residency at the Jack Kerouac House in Orlando, Florida, which is where I am now.
Yeah.
And applied for it. And I got in.
Yeah.
And I thought when I found this, or when I discovered I got in, I thought, well, they must have had 4 people apply. I was pretty fortunate.
Yeah.
And then I found out that we had alternates. And like, if I couldn't make it, there was somebody else who's going to go live in the house for 3 months. This is a 3-month residency where you are the only person in the house that Jack Kerouac lived in when he lived in Orlando.
Yeah.
And so there were 8 of us, and I thought, oh, well, I must have won the coin toss. Then I found out later that 300 people applied.
Wow.
And I was one of the 4 selected, and I thought, oh, fuck. They think I could do this. They think I'm actually good at this. They're going to find out, and they're going to expose me as a fraud, and they're going to kick me out. And so during that residency, I wrote half of the book.
Yeah.
Plotted it out, laid it all out on index cards, and created an outline, and I followed that. And in the 3 months, I wrote half the book. And then over the next couple of years, I finished the book. And I finally got sick of saying I was writing it. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to do it, get it done. And so, finished it in late 2018 and let it sit. You should always do this with big manuscripts like this. Let it sit for a few months don't look at it at all, and then come back to it with fresh eyes. And I did that, and in April 2019, I published it on Kindle and excuse me, in print on demand. But the story is basically what I said earlier. It's what if the island were forced to secede from the United States because of a 200-year-old peace treaty, and then Congress was going to repatriate, but because it's Congress, they were going to take 2 years to do it because they have to have hearings, and it's an election year coming up, and they want to campaign on their opponent being soft on Mackinac, and so it's satire. It's in the style and reminiscent of Christopher Moore and Joseph Heller, Catch-22. I've got a couple of scenes that just are an homage to Joseph Heller.
Yeah.
And I just came up with this just wackiness of a book.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So was the residency at the Kerouac House, was that what brought you to Florida, or was that just, you were going to go there and come back and you decided to stay? How did that fit in?
It was a coincidence.
Yeah.
The residency just so happened to be here. We moved to Florida because my wife wanted to move here and I wanted to stay married. And so we decided to come down as a family. She wanted to be in warmer weather.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Of all the places we wanted to go, Orlando was the one that had Disney World. And so we picked Orlando. And the residency just happened to be here. If we hadn't moved, I would have come down for 3 months, lived in the house, and then gone back home.
Okay.
Which is what everybody does. We have 4 per year, and so now because I was local, and because I have that business background, I got 2 months after I left, I was asked to be on the board.
Okay.
And so now I'm on the board of directors at the Kerouac House, and I get to hang out with the writers. And like tonight, we've got an open mic for the writers of Central Florida, and I'm taking our current writer with me so she can participate.
All right. Well, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about ProBlog Service. Tell me the state of ProBlog Service, and if you would, kind of the state of blogging, because and tell me, I suspect you do more than just blogging, but tell me a little bit about what the model is, where you think it's headed, and what that means for blogging and social kind of writ large, if you don't mind.
Okay, sure. So ProBlog Service is essentially it's a content marketing agency, but we focus on blogging. So I just tell people I'm a ghost blogger.
Yep.
Or a corporate ghost blogger. It sounds cooler for some reason. But all I do is write blog articles for companies that want to be found online more easily, and they want to sound like experts in their field when they are found. And so we do this. I do this just by posing 4 or 8 questions per month to the client. We work on retainer basis, and I come up with 4 or 8 questions during an interview. They answer those questions. I record it and turn those into 4 or 8 blog articles per month.
Yep.
And then publish it on their blog, optimize it for search, and then promote it on their social networks. And a lot of companies are doing this, or a lot of companies are realizing they need content marketing. Because there's so much of it, there's so many people churning out blog articles, and now there's artificial intelligence software that's churning out blog articles, but they're awful.
Yeah.
But a lot of these companies are working on the model of, we don't want 1,000 people to read one article. We want 1,000 articles, each read by one person.
Yeah.
And so where I come in is somebody does want 1,000 people to read an article. They want it to be so good, so well written, so interesting that it's something that gets shared. It's something that becomes like an industry standard or an industry report.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the model that I work under, as that cream rising to the top.
Well, and as it happens, as Google's algorithm evolves, it's the right play for SEO, because Google's getting harder to game and quality content is winning more often. At least that's my perception.
Exactly, because Google is paying attention to user behavior.
Yep.
So if somebody comes to a page and they stay on it for several minutes versus comes to a page, stays there for 10 seconds and leaves,
Yeah.
They look at that and they say, well, this second page, people must not like it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gets lowered in the search rankings, where the stuff that people are reading and sharing, Google says, this must be good stuff. And so they raise it up in the search engine. And so because of that, I think blogging it's here to stay. People have tried to rename it and call it something else and replace it with something else. But my argument has always been businesses are just now getting it.
Yeah.
So it's not going to go anywhere for a good long while.
Yeah.
I still remember when email was a fad.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
businesses would not touch email. And now people are saying email's going to go away. And it's like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
Not while the corporations have it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you see as the interplay between video content and long form written content? If you listen to the conventional wisdom, video is something everyone should be doing. Video is a good alternative to written long form content. Obviously, it's not an either or situation, but when asked about where video fits in, how do you answer that question?
I think video is important in the B2C world.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you've got younger customers, they love watching video.
Yeah.
But I think in the B2B world, I think the long form written content is preferable. For one thing, a lot of people read faster.
Mm-hmm.
You figure the average spoken content is 100 to 150 words per minute. We speak that fast.
Mm-hmm.
And 150 words per minute sounds kind of like this, and 100 words per minute sounds like this. Well, anybody who reads twice that speed can watch or can read an article in half the time that they could watch it. And if you're somebody like me who reads much faster, I don't want to watch a 3-minute video when I can read that in a minute. I can read the transcript in a minute, and I'd rather do that. Plus, depending on the kind of company you work for, your IT department may not let you watch YouTube.
Yeah, sure.
Or look at Facebook where these videos are located.
Yeah.
And so how do you get around those IT filters?
Sure.
So in the B2B world, I think long form is still important. The other issue is that Google is still learning to transcribe videos.
Yeah.
To put the transcriptions down on the YouTube page.
Yeah.
So what you should do if you want to optimize your videos is you transcribe it and stick that on your YouTube, your video in the description, because they're still looking at text.
Yeah.
And make those optimization decisions.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So with all of the things that you're working on, what are some of the things that are taking up most of your time, most of your energy, most of your headspace, the big rocks that are on your to-do list that you're trying to push? What are some of the big things you're working on right now?
I've got a couple of ghost books in the works. One, I'm just going into the final editing process.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got 2 on the horizon that we're trying to line everything up so I can get started on those. I'm trying to rewrite some of my own content, a couple of white papers just for downloadable content as a lead generation. And then on the personal front, my wife and I are working on a sitcom.
Oh, wow.
Trying to pitch to some streaming services. And we know people who are in the entertainment world. My wife is an actor. And so we sent it to somebody who is an agent out in Hollywood, who's the agent of a friend of ours, and she looked at it and said, "This is great, but even with my contacts, it's still a long shot to get it on Netflix."
Sure.
She said, "You're better off creating it yourself, streaming it, and hope it gets picked up," which is the Letterkenny model. Anybody watches Letterkenny from Canada, they started out as a YouTube short series.
I didn't realize that.
So, and if anybody's looking for great TV, Letterkenny, it's hilarious. It's foul, but it's hilarious.
Yeah.
But they started out streaming episodes on YouTube, and so we are going to start producing episodes and airing those on YouTube and trying to build up an audience and catch Netflix's attention or Hulu or whomever,
and
see if we can get that going. So, and then I've got another novel that I've been working on and just kind of noodling around with, and haven't touched it in several months.
Yeah.
Which seems to be about how I work on those.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, good luck with the sitcom. It was also a long shot to apply for the Kerouac House residency. And
yeah.
So, yeah. Well, let's pivot to the speed round of the show, if you don't mind. And I'm going to ask you 3 questions that sometimes generate a quick answer, but it's not important the answer be quick. But it's more digestible stuff. So when it comes to your career, you've had a long, successful career in content development, in writing and communication. What has been the key to your success? What do you think ultimately is important for people to remember when trying to build a fulfilling and successful career?
2 things. One, you have to be good at the thing you do. And you should love the thing you do. So that's still one thing. You should love the thing you do because you're going to spend all day doing it.
Yeah.
And so you want to put all the time and energy to get really good at it.
Yeah.
And I mean really, really good at it. I've been writing in one form or another for 34 years.
Mm-hmm.
Since college. And kind of in my late 20s, I really started to focus on developing that talent. That's what makes me stand out from most other content marketers. But I couldn't do that if I didn't love it.
Yeah.
So get good at the thing you want to do. The other thing is you have to do a lot of networking.
Yeah.
You have to go out and meet people, join networking groups. There's Rainmakers in Indianapolis. There's Chambers of Commerce. Every major city has some kind of event. There's 1 Million Cups. I actually run the 1 Million Cups chapter down here in Orlando. But then meet people, have coffee with them, and start asking for referrals. Do you know somebody who has this thing? Or do you know somebody who does this thing? And you get to be top of mind for them. And when somebody asks them, hey, I need a blog created, or I need somebody to do my bookkeeping, or I need business insurance, you know who that person is because they've been meeting with you. You've been meeting with them.
Sure.
And so you have to do a lot of networking and just drink a lot of coffee or tea to get your name out there and build those connections that build your career.
Yeah.
And that's true whether you're starting your own business or working at an agency.
Yeah.
You should be networking with other people.
For sure. And I like the part about making the ask because, we've been taught good things come to those who wait, but as it turns out, good things sometimes come to those who ask too. So,
yeah. See, I think that's an Indiana thing.
Yeah.
I grew up in Indiana. You're from Boston, but you've been here long enough that we've kind of infected you. We have this mindset of you don't ask because that's pushy, and you don't brag. But we have equated talking about yourself with bragging.
Yeah.
Like, saying I wrote a book. I still hesitate telling people I wrote a book, and I wrote the book on telling people how to write the book, or how to tell people I wrote the book. I still hesitate to do that because it feels like bragging, but you have to do it. And you have to overcome that reticence of talking about yourself because nobody's going to know if you don't tell them.
Yeah, it's definitely something I've noticed since moving here. I think imposter syndrome is somewhere woven into the Indiana State Seal. So, yeah. All right. Well, the second question, and I'm going to nuance this one a little bit for you. So I usually ask people, what's one thing you want people to know about your organization? That could be a myth you want to dispel or something that's underappreciated. But talk about, the work that you do in general. What's something that you think might be a surprise to people or a myth that you want to dispel about the work that you do?
The idea that writing simply is easy.
Yeah.
It's actually very difficult. I've done it enough that it's second nature to me, but to write, you want to write things that are, at a 6th grade level or lower, just because that's what we're comfortable with in our cranial capacity. Our brain pipeline loves 6th grade reading level and lower. And, for a great example, you can Google it and find the full text. Ernest Hemingway's Big Two-Hearted River, 7,000 words. It's written at a 3.4 grade level. I ran the whole text through, the Flesch Kincaid score that you can get on Word. Or if you get HemingwayApp.com, you can see what your reading score is. And that is written at a third grade reading level. But it's such a good story, and it's so interesting. And so to realize that it's written so simply is staggering.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of effort. And if you want to test it for yourself, just take something you've written, take a 300-word email, just a simple email that you send to somebody, and paste it in HemingwayApp.com and see what the scores say. And it'll be written at a 10th grade level, and it'll have lots of passive voice and lots of adverbs and lots of complex and very complex sentences.
Yeah.
And you'll look at it and think, well, this is garbage.
Yeah.
And if you do that, if you have that thought, you are ahead of 90% of the people who just write stuff in this world. That thought of, this is garbage, I should fix this. You'll be so much further ahead than everybody else. And so learning to write simply is pretty difficult.
Yeah. It takes a lot of effort to make it look effortless.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was it Twain who said, I'm sorry this letter is so long. It would have been shorter if I had the time.
Yeah, for sure. All right, last question. What is one tip or tool or trick or hack, call it what you will, that you use in your professional life, but it could be anywhere in your life, that you really rely upon that you think people should know about?
Hemingway app is one.
Yep.
Grammarly is another.
Grammarly's great.
Yeah, get the Grammarly plugin for Chrome, and I even pay for the professional upgrade.
Yeah.
It's critical to me. But I think the number one hack, and I think this is another surprise for a lot of people, is I read constantly. I don't watch a lot of TV, maybe more than I should, but I read 100 books a year.
Wow.
And not business books.
Yeah.
And I don't read blogs.
Yeah.
I said earlier, a lot of people are just turning out mediocre blogs. You won't get good by reading mediocre stuff.
Yeah, you have to read things that people were paid to write.
Yeah. And so that's how you build your skill. You look at the people, and this is why I read books. These are the people who are very, very good at writing books, and I read it as much for the entertainment as for the techniques that I want to steal and make my own. I read a lot of mysteries.
Yeah.
Like Golden Age of Mystery. That's kind of the thing I've been reading now. So Agatha Christie and Niall Marsh and P.D. James, and she's kind of older than that, but just a lot of great authors producing great work, and that's how I sharpen my skills. If I'm not doing it, it's like football players. If they're not practicing, they're watching videos. Mm-hmm. So writers, if we're not writing, we're reading.
Yeah.
So anybody who wants to get good at writing needs to read a lot.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, more great advice, and certainly from someone who knows what he's doing. So, Erik, you are living proof that philosophy majors can make it in the real world.
Yeah, I went from theoretical BS into applied BS. I got
You've even written the book on BS.
Yeah, and I got my BS in BS from BSU. So,
yeah,
not many people can say.
Well, congratulations for everything you have going on, and it's great to see your face. Thanks for being with us, and thanks to everyone who took the opportunity to listen to this episode of the Asher Marketing Podcast. We will be back next week with another great guest, and we hope you will join us then.